What is up again? Welcome to another episode of Not Weird, Just Autistic TV. I am J.R. Reed, and I am here with a great guest today who you'll hopefully get a lot of information from. His name is Jonathan Martinis. He is a lawyer. Yeah, they get a bad rap, but this is one of the good ones. And he is Senior Director for Law and Policy at the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University, and a disability rights lawyer who recently won, well, I guess not so recently anymore, won a landmark case for disability rights. Jonathan, how you doing?
Very well, Joe. Thank you for having me. Glad to see you think there's a couple of good lawyers out there.
Yeah, well, you know, and I just want you to know that I got Senior Director for Law and Policy at Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University without reading a darn thing. I remember that.
That's better than I can do.
Yeah. And the other thing I was going to say about you too is, as Grace, the secretary in Ferris Bueller's Day Off said, he's a righteous dude.
I try, so, sir. I try.
Jonathan, why don't you give everybody a little brief bio of yourself or introduction to yourself, and then let's start talking about some of the cases.
Sure. Capricorn.
Okay, good.
I am the Senior Director for Law and Policy at the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University. That's a nonprofit organization affiliated with the law school at Syracuse. What I work on and what we work on are ways to empower people with disabilities to be exactly what they should be, which is full and equal members of society. For too long, and I don't think I'm telling anyone anything they don't already know, for far too long, people with disabilities have been kept outside of society, been made to feel like they can't or shouldn't be part of society. What we do at Burton Blatt, what I am very honored to do, is work with people with disabilities within the system, and when we have to push the system to make sure that people with disabilities are exactly what they should be, which are full and equal citizens.
Absolutely. Well, hey, you know, since you're talking about pushing a little bit, why don't you tell us a little bit about Jenny and the Justice for Jenny case that really helped bring supported decision-making into the forefront?
Sure, and thank you. I was just lucky that I got to know Jenny. Jenny Hatch, when I met her, was a 29-year-old woman. It's 2012, so she is 37 now. Time flies. But Jenny had her own life, her whole life. She had her own job. Jenny was a person with Down syndrome, still is, and that never kept her out of society. Jenny always felt like part of society. Jenny had her own job, not a special or supported job. She's making regular pay, paying regular taxes, working regular hours. Jenny had her own apartment, not a group home, not a supported home. Jenny had a house with a roommate that by all accounts was kept spotlessly. Had a church she went to, had friends she had, was an active political volunteer. And then one day, she was out riding her bike and she got hit by a car in an accident that caused no impact to her cognitive ability, did not impact the way she functioned at all, hurt her back. But shortly after that, her parents, her mom and stepfather, moved to put her into guardianship. So that when I met Jenny in 2013, instead of living where she wanted to live, she was living in a group home, a segregated group home where she didn't want to live. Instead of working where she wanted to work, she was made to work in a sheltered workshop attached to the group home. If you don't know what a sheltered workshop is, it's where people with disabilities make less than minimum wage to do very menial tasks.
And that's a whole nother show on its own.
Yep, and it is. It needs to be talked about. Instead of being allowed to go to her church, she said, I want to go to my church. She was told, we go to this other church, get used to your new life. When she said she wanted to see her friends, she was told, make new friends, get used to your new life. Well, the one thing about Jenny was she wasn't prepared to get used to any new life. She wanted the life she had. She wanted the life she wanted. So Jenny fought, and I got to know her, and I became her lawyer. And Jenny always said, I don't need a guardian. I don't need someone to make decisions for me. What I need, Jenny said, is a little bit of help. And we all need a little bit of help, JR. You should have seen me trying to get on your website. I had to find the email. I had to log on. I had to go through the instructions. But the only difference is when I need a little bit of help, people say I'm getting advice or I'm getting information or I'm doing research. When people with disabilities say, I need some help, what everyone jumps to the conclusion of is they can't do things. Well, what we did with Jenny in Jenny's case was argue that getting help is natural, getting help is good. So we used the term supported decision-making to say that Jenny could make decisions on her own, didn't need a guardian, because she had support, help to do it. And if you think about it, we all use supported decision-making. Every time we get advice, every time we ask the doctor to explain something in plain language, every time we go to a friend to say, what should I do about this? Every time we ask a professional for advice about something in our lives, we are using supported decision-making because we're getting the help we need to do the things we need to do so we can do them on our own. And Jenny could do the same thing. It just took a year of going through trial and making arguments and putting witnesses on. But I'm so happy to say that at the end, Jenny is now using supported decision making. She doesn't have a guardianship. She beat the guardianship because, like she said, she didn't need a guardian. Just need a little bit of help, like the rest of us.
Right, and you know, going on with what you said about asking people for help. I mean, that does include the headlight fluid, right?
Of course. That's it's a standard. I know you've heard me make that joke, but it's I got a buddy. I got a buddy who knows about cars and I don't. So my classic example of supported decision-making is when the mechanic tells me that I'm a quart low on headlight fluid and dropping it. It's going to cost $2,000 to fix. And by the way, my muffler bearings are rattling around. And he'll fix that for free with the fluid. And I go to my buddy and I say, is this a good deal? Should I buy a new car? And my buddy goes, hey, dummy, there's no such thing as headlight fluid. You're getting ripped off. And that's what supported decision-making is. I didn't know that, but Jeff did. And because I knew enough to go to Jeff for help, I was able to find me a mechanic that wouldn't rip me off.
Right. And I'll tell you what, from the one time I've seen you in person, that is one of the things I took away and just thought was one of the funniest things ever. So
yeah, funny to you. Those of us who don't know what headlight fluid is felt awfully dumb.
No, it's funny to me because I would have done the same thing. So Jonathan, what would you tell parents? And I work a lot with kids that are transitioning from high school to regular life. What would you say to the parents that think guardianship is their only option?
Well, it's not the only option, but here's what I say to parents is I never tell parents what to do. Never. I never tell parents do or don't get guardianship because I don't know their child. And it's not right for me to tell anyone what to do. But what I do talk to parents about is what they want for their child. Because I get parents coming to me from across the country saying, my teacher said I have to get guardianship. My doctor, my lawyer said I have to get guardianship. And I always ask the same question to the parents, well, what do you want for your child? And they always say some version of the same thing. They always say, I want my child to be as happy as possible, as safe as possible, as independent as possible. And when they tell me that, I say, okay, we can talk about that. Because here's something that we know from 40 years of science. There have been studies going on with people with disabilities for 40 years. And what they have found time after time after time after time is that people with disabilities, people with disabilities who make more decisions, who have what is called more self-determination, who have more control over their life. We have found in study after study after study, they have better lives. They are more likely to be independent. They are more likely to be employed. They are more likely to be safer. Here's just one example. There was a study done across the country. It was done twice in the last decade called the National Core Indicator Study. What it looked at was the quality of life of people with disabilities. And it was, I'm not a scientist, it was, I call it apples to apples study. So it compared people with mild disabilities to mild disabilities, moderate to moderate, severe, severe. That was their phrases. And what it looked at was the impact of certain things on quality of life. One of the things they looked at was whether or not a person had a guardian. And here's what they found across the country. Remember, apples to apples. People who did not have guardians were more likely to live independently, have jobs, have friends, socialize in their community, be respected, practice the religion of their choice than people with guardians. So what I tell the parents is not do something or don't do something, but think about it. Guardianship will always be an option. It's not going anywhere. But if we know that the things that you want for your child are more likely to happen when your child is making more choices on his or her own, why not try to empower first? It might work. It might not. If it doesn't work, guardianship's always an option. But given the rights that are so precious to us and the opportunities that we take for granted every day, but make us who we are, the simple choices to go where we want, do what we want, and see what we want, isn't that worth trying? Empowering first before taking away.
Yeah. And, Jonathan, one thing I think it's really important to point out is, and I can't remember if it's the Declaration of Independence or one of those old documents, but, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it doesn't say for people that don't have disabilities. It's for everyone.
It's the Declaration of Independence, JR, and it is the founding document of our country. And what Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, and I'm talking to you from Virginia, what Thomas Jefferson said was that we hold these truths to be self-evident, meaning they're obvious. All people are created equal, and we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, rights that should never be taken away. And among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That just means the rights to have the kind of life we want to have, to live where we want, to pursue the happiness that we feel is most important to us. And you're right, it doesn't say unless you have a disability. It doesn't say unless someone thinks you can't do things. So as precious as those rights are, shouldn't we try to empower people to have them before we say they can't?
Right. That's right. Well, you've also written a book about this. The book is Supported Decision Making from Justice to Jenny for Justice to All.
I did, along with Peter Blank, who was an expert witness in Jenny's case. What we talk about in that book are ways to make supported decision making happen. The beginning of the book is Jenny's story, and Jenny wrote the foreword to the book. But really what we wanted to do was talk directly to people who might be interested in supported decision-making, people with disabilities, parents, professionals, and write a book for them, not for academics, not for lawyers, not for people up here, but for people who actually have to make things happen. So the book talks about Jenny's case, and you can learn all about Jenny there. You can learn all about guardianship and supported decision-making, but the most of the book are ways we can use supported decision-making every day. In education, to help us work, in healthcare, to manage money. Because again, think about it. We all do that. We all get help to do the things we do every day. What the book is about are the ways we could try to do things with people with disabilities. I never say there's only one way to do things. Anyone ever tells you there's one way to do things, run away. But what it can help you do is explore for yourself or explore for your child and find ways that might work for you or someone in your life. And maybe give you a little bit of hope that it doesn't have to only be one way.
Yeah. Well, being autistic and going to school before there was a spectrum to be on, is I was out of high school for 13 years before they started diagnosing autism as we know it today. And I almost failed algebra 1 and 2 because I got the answers right, but I didn't show the work the way the teacher taught it. Again, that's the more than one way to do things kind of thing.
Indeed. I think coloring outside the lines is, again, that's something we should be celebrating. We should be celebrating diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, diversity of abilities. There are studies showing, by the way, that inclusive classrooms with people with and without disabilities benefit not just the students with disabilities, but the other students. And diverse workplaces are more creative and productive. So, finding the right answer, the quote unquote wrong way, means you found the right answer.
Yeah. Well, and I think when you have that inclusive classroom, you lose a lot of, for example, the term SPED kids, which to me is just a huge insult because it's separating them from the neurotypical kids. But I think if you put them all in one classroom, like you were saying, for an inclusive room, you lose that label pretty much, and those kids get to feeling like they're normal, regular kids in a regular classroom.
I had a parent once tell me and correct me, and she was right to do so, that special education is not a place. You're not in special education. That would be
Correct.
a separate place. Special education is a support, and we all get supports. So what special education ought to be, and what it's supposed to be under the law, is looking at each child individually and saying, what does this person need to succeed? What are the supports and services? What are the related services that are going to help this person do their best work? And that's the whole point. That's mentioned in the book as well. The idea of the individualized program for education. The individualized employment program in vocational rehabilitation, the individualized service program in Medicaid waivers. It's all about the individual. It's not about where you are. It's about who you are. And that's what it should be, shouldn't it?
Yeah. I mean, everybody, whether, they're neurodivergent of any kind or have a physical disability, we all have things we can do. We all have things we can contribute. They're just not always so obvious.
Of course. And, here's again a difference between people with disabilities and temporarily able-bodied people, which is what I call people without disabilities, because we're all about 1 second from having a disability if you don't already. One accident, one diagnosis, one slip, one fall, one disease. So if you're temporarily able-bodied, people don't look at the things you don't do well the same as they do for people with disabilities. Here's an example. I stink at math. I'm terrible at math. So no one looks at me and goes, you can't do math, therefore you can't do anything. What they do is they say, congratulations, Jonathan, you found a career where you don't have to do math. Or alternately, there are things that you do well that can help you get around or overcome or deal with the things you don't do well. Way too often for people with disabilities, it's the exact opposite. They start by looking at what people with disabilities can't do, or their limitations, as it's often described in law. And we build from weakness, where what we should be doing is looking at strengths and using strengths to combat weaknesses, just like everyone else. So in your case, JR, if your processing ability is so good that you could come up with the algebraic answer without having to go through 5 steps, shouldn't we be saying that JR is a super processor, and how can we use that skill elsewhere? Right. Instead of saying, because you process that way, you're failing math.
Although in my case, I was doing 5 steps. They were just 5 different steps than the teacher taught. There's always more than one way to do something, right?
Many ways to 21, as my boss says.
Yeah. One question I did forget to ask you earlier, and I think it's important to note that Jenny's parents were the ones who put her into that guardianship. What was their reaction when the court overturned that?
The court really wanted there to be reconciliation between Jenny and her parents. Obviously, the relationship was strained. I know Jenny very well. I talk with Jenny frequently, and I'm sorry to say it hasn't become a stronger relationship, but the relationship wasn't terribly strong before. I'm not going to trash anybody on television, but let's just leave it at that.
Yeah, well, parents with kids with disabilities react in all sorts of different ways. So,
I see a lot more hope. I see a lot more hope now, JR, with younger parents. Younger parents are a lot more insistent, as they should be, because they see more possibilities. We live in an age now where so many more things can be done. Let's talk about supported decision-making again for a second, okay? Sure. Because think about the phone you're carrying in your pocket, all right? and realize that you spend a whole lot less time talking on this phone than you do using it for so many other things. So with this phone, I can connect with my doctor and conference call in, if I want, my mom, my brother, my sister, my whoever, to be a supporter to help the doctor understand me and me understand the doctor. Mm-hmm. With my phone, I can access my bank records and give someone else access, if I want, to help me balance my budget. With my phone, I can set reminders for when to take medication and when to see the doctor. Here's an example. I worked with a person who has a traumatic brain injury and diabetes. And because of the TBI, she sometimes doesn't keep good track of her blood sugar. And a couple of times she's had crises. You know what she has? She's got a free app. Connects her monitor to her phone. When her sugar gets too low, it sends her a text, eat something. If it gets even lower, it texts her supporters to intervene. And just like that, with a free app, she is able to be more independent.
Yeah, so, I mean, technology today is amazing, especially when you look back, and this is a story that I love, but the story of your Uncle Bob and how you got into disability rights to begin with.
Thank you for bringing
that up. There wasn't that for your Uncle Bob.
Yeah. Jared, there's a lot of feedback going on right now. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Okay. Just cut out that last part, please. So my Uncle Bob was born in the 50s. And he was born with cerebral palsy. And the nurse, this is the story I've only heard recently, so it still gets to me. Full story. The nurse came to my grandfather and said, he's never going to walk. He's never going to talk. If you want, we can leave him by the window and nature will take its course. And my grandfather goes and gets a doctor. And the doctor takes care of my uncle. And sometime later tells my grandfather, he's never going to walk. He's never going to talk. There are places for people like him. He'll be well taken care of. You never have to come see him if you don't want. And eventually, nature will take its course. So my grandfather in the 1950s, puts a ramp on his house, puts an addition on his house where my Uncle Bob would live. And my grandfather, 20 years before the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that gave people the right to go to school if you have a disability, fought for Uncle Bob to have an education. By the time I was born, there was no surprises. He was just my Uncle Bob. He was at the dinner table with the rest of us. He couldn't talk, but he could spell. He had control of exactly one finger, but he could point at a letterboard and spell and tell jokes. And he could go places and do things. And he was funny. He had a life. Yep. And then I'm in law school, and it's the 1990s. And people with disabilities are still not having the same opportunities that my Uncle Robert had in the 50s and 60s. And to be honest with you, it just pissed me off. What kind of society tells an entire 50 million strong group of people that they're not allowed to do the things that my grandfather could help my uncle do 40 years ago? So I don't know if that's an aha moment or what. It just speaks to what I like to say now, which is we can do better. We can do better. There's nothing more American than saying we can do better. And again, if my Uncle Bob and my grandfather could do Olmstead in community integration 40 years before there was an Olmstead case, then we as a country can do better, and we have to.
Yeah, and I look at people like your grandfather and Temple Grandin's parents, at just the tenacity and strength they had to have to keep fighting for something that, as you said, wouldn't come around for 30, 40 years.
And something that's as natural as anything. I mean, being a citizen, I when I try to talk to people without disabilities, I ask them what their favorite right is. And they always look at me like I have three heads. What do you mean, what's your favorite right? Because people without disabilities never really have to think about their rights. They have them. They think about their rights when their rights are at risk. We're hearing a lot of talk these days about rights with regard to masks and vaccines, and people are all up in arms about rights now because they feel like their rights are at stake, or that they might lose their rights, or that their right to be healthy might be at risk because someone won't wear a mask, or their right to freedom might be at stake because they have to wear a mask, or their right to make decisions about vaccines, etc. People are all up in arms about their rights. People with disabilities live every day at risk of losing those rights and more. Because in a guardianship, you can lose the right to say what you want to say, go where you want to go, do what you want to do, choose your health care, whether to work. Jenny Hatch, who was politically active the year she was in guardianship, lost her right to vote.
Yep,
so
crazy.
The most basic things that make us American are at stake. We can do better than that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, Jonathan, where can people reach you if they want to learn more or find out a little bit about you?
The best way to get to me is email. You can Google me. It's my name's on your screen, Jonathan Martinis, Martinis. But my email address through Syracuse is J as in Jonathan, my first name, G as in Gerald, my middle name, Martin. jgmartin at syr.edu. So jgmartin at syr for Syracuse.edu education.
There we go. It's right there on the screen for you.
I think it's important. And please, to your audience, take that seriously. Feel free to email. The most important thing that we can do is talk to each other. There is someone out there right now who is going through what you're going through, who knows something that you wish you knew. If I can help, if I can help be a connector, I would love to do that.
Hey, and even myself as a self-advocate for autism and neurodiversity and mental health, I've got my people that I go to. I've got my colleagues that I go to and say, hey, what do you think about this? Or what about this idea?
Of course, so, I joke all the time. My sister is an assistant superintendent of schools in New York, and you better bet I'm calling her every week when one of my kids is having trouble in school, or as I put it, days that ended Y. I'm calling for help for her for whenever I need it. That's what we should do. We have go-to people in our lives, and that's what supported decision-making is. It's going to the people in our lives that we should go to, that we do, that help us do the things we need to do.
Right. Well, before we get out of here, once again, the author of Supported Decision Making, From Justice to Jenny to Justice for All. It is available on Amazon. It is an amazing book. And I just like you said, it was more examples of what to do and tips and advice than it is anything else. So check that out. And I believe there's even a Facebook group dedicated to that book. Isn't there? There
is for a discussion about the book. And it's been just an amazing honor. And I think we've started something special. Jenny started something special.
Yeah.
I'm just happy to be along for the ride. But since Jenny's case, we're now up to 13 states, New Hampshire last week, and the District of Columbia that have passed laws. In just 8 years, 13 states in D.C. have passed laws recognizing supported decision-making as an alternative to guardianship. So I've always called her the rock that starts the avalanche, and that avalanche is only growing.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Jonathan, I do appreciate you taking some time out of your day. And I think this supported decision-making is something that's not just for people on the spectrum. It's for anybody with a disability, and definitely something that you should look into for your family when you're making a consideration for guardianship.
Thank you so much, Jared. So, my honor.
Jonathan, we'll talk to you again, and it's always a pleasure, and have a good, probably rest of the year.
Anytime. Thank you, Jared. Take good care.
Bye.